The story of the UK is an economy that has got real momentum.
What is broken can be repaired. What is ruined can be rebuilt.
UK inflation is becoming much more homegrown.
We have huge potential as an economy in the UK.
This is a time to tell Israel there is a path to peace.
Our plan for the British economy is working, but the work is not done.
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Welcome to the programme. For some reason, I have political slogans stuck in my head this morning. And why? I mean, it's always because I use them for bad jokes, is normally when this comes up. And it was a favourite thing of mine to do in France, because French people used to be mystified that I would remember them. Do you remember? Do political slogans
some of them stick in my mind. Yeah. I mean, get Brexit done.
True, a classic of the genre.
Take Back Control was the sort of, it was a reversion from that. Those stick in my mind, but obviously I spent a lot of time in the States, so yes, we can.
Of course. See, the ones, I think of the Irish ones actually, because there were ones during, Fianna Fáil had one in 2002, which was a lot done, more to do. And then at the height of Ireland's kind of Celtic Tiger economy, the Labour Party, which was in opposition at the time, had one that was, "But are you happy?" Which was very interesting as a reference to people. Yeah. But there's one, of course, from the political landscape that's back in the top of our minds this morning. Do you remember this one?
I took the decision to call a general election so that we have the strong and stable leadership we need to see us through Brexit and beyond. The choice at the election is clear. Strong and stable leadership with me in the national interest, or a hung parliament and coalition of chaos under Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh, strong and stable. So often parodied afterwards because of what followed that election in 2017.
Absolutely. It's so difficult, isn't it, for the catchphrases not to become terrible cliches. What our producer has just said, hands, face, space, which, I mean, makes me
also
laugh now and cringe.
Yeah,
but yes.
Slightly traumatic too. But I mean, the strong and stable mantra is interesting, because I think now it probably became quite aspirational in the Conservative Party after the Johnson and Truss years, of course, and it was part of what brought Rishi Sunak to power as leader as well. But now, today, that seems to maybe be in question as well. The PM's at the COVID inquiry today. He's facing, of course, tough questions over the Eat Out to Help Out scheme as well. Something that had led to all sorts of monikers when he rose to power at that moment.
Do you remember actually going out? I remember the restaurant that my husband and I went to for that Eat Out to Help Out moment. And weirdly, I remember the trepidation that we felt about it. So it kind of does have some very, it has evocative memories. But this is at the centre, really, of the Prime Minister facing questioning today from the KC, the King's Council, at the official COVID inquiry. He went from, do you remember Rishi Dishy?
Yes,
Dishy Rishi, what the newspapers called him, then branded Dr. Death the Chancellor by one of the top advisors in government because of that policy.
Yeah, of course. So that's one focus of the Prime Minister today. The other, though, is everything that's happening behind the scenes in the Conservative Party around the Rwanda deportation bill, the European Research Group, those pro-Brexit MPs headed by Mark Francois. They're planning a meeting today to discuss how they're going to vote on it. Are they going to try and source the 29 votes needed to defeat Sunak's legislation? Then you've got the One Nation group of moderate Tories. They're also going to decide on their position today as well.
The question is it basically a return to Conservative Party Tory chaos? Joining us to discuss, our senior government reporter Alex Wickham. Good to have you in the studio. So the disarray, is there really, how much disarray really is there in the Conservative Party at the moment? Is it a return, to that kind of chaos that we've seen quite a lot of?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of disarray, and it absolutely does feel a bit Theresa May, which, no offence to Theresa May, is probably not what you want to hear if you're Rishi Sunak. He has got these different factions pulling him in different directions within the Conservative Party on his flagship piece of Rwanda legislation, and it is very difficult to see a way through for Downing Street. Whether the big crunch point comes this week or after Christmas remains to be seen. It could be that Tory MPs just basically let him off the hook this week and vote his bill through its second reading in order to amend it at a later date, sort of regroup for the big fight later on. But it may not even get that far. So yes, he is in big trouble. I mean, the problem is, if you're Rishi Sunak, you are hoping to go into next year as right, this is election year, we need to all pull together, we need to, show that we're united and can take the fight to Labour. And instead, the narrative, irresistibly, is Tory chaos yet again.
But Alex, surely with everything that's happened over the past couple of years, your bar for what counts as serious Tory infighting must be very high. The public's must be as well. Where does this fit into the scale of previous episodes we've seen?
It's up there. I don't think he faces an immediate, likelihood.
We're not at the jostling of the whips in the lobbies stage, are we?
Not far off. I mean, I don't think we're at the sort of immediate peril for him in that, he could be forced out this week or anything like that. I don't think. But, the fact that we can't say that for certain does show what a dangerous situation he is in. I think the central scenario is that he sort of lives to fight another day this week. He wins this vote in the Commons narrowly, and then the factions regroup, the sort of right-wing pro-Brexit hardcore and anti-immigration faction,
yes,
and then the sort of more centrist faction. They both regroup and they both sort of work out, right, after Christmas, what are we going to do? Are we seriously going to basically threaten to remove the Prime Minister again?
Look, on the Rwanda Bill itself, it just does seem incredible that both the former Home Secretary and the former Immigration Minister say that this bill will not work, that is going to the vote. Then you've got these four lawyers, the so-called Star Chamber, getting together and giving their analysis that apparently a lot of the different factions within the Conservative Party are going to look at very, very closely. In terms of the bill in and of itself, do they have enough votes? The ERG, remember them, so influential in every Brexit vote. Do they have enough votes? Do the One Nation groups, have enough votes to support or scupper, more importantly, the bill?
Well, Downing Street will hope that it can peel off enough from each group
faction
of rebellions and convince enough MPs to just to basically get it through tomorrow.
And is that what you're hearing is happening at the moment? Are there lots of angry phone calls being made?
Yeah, Number 10 has spent the weekend, and the whips and even David Cameron have spent the weekend, on hitting the phones, telling Tory MPs, come on, if you vote this down, you're basically saying the Prime Minister's finished. And that is, Number 10 is very keen to say that this isn't a confidence vote, the sort of formal way of saying that if he loses the vote, then he has to go. Of course, they're keen to say that because they're nervous about the vote. But, that is basically the message to Tory MPs.
But how did it get to this? I mean, it was only a few weeks ago that we were talking about the 5 pledges, and actually economically, on inflation, the Prime Minister's doing okay, better than a lot of people had thought. On economic growth, also not too terrible. We avoided recession. On the others, there was some progress happening. But this issue of immigration, again, is just so central. I mean, it was, one could say, also the issue that did for David Cameron himself as PM.
Yeah, and immigration typically should be home turf for the Tories, and a tough immigration policy sound tough, get the numbers down and attack the Labour Party. That's traditionally what the Tories have done with some success down the decades. But for this Prime Minister, he hasn't managed to seriously. I mean, he promised to stop the boats. He hasn't managed to stop the boats. They've come down a little bit. Legal migration, very high. And the thing is, Rishi Sunak chose to make stopping the boats a flagship policy of his, one of his 5 pledges. No one made him do that. He decided politically that he had to do that in order to get the right wing on side, basically. No one made him back the Rwanda policy. It was Boris Johnson and Priti Patel's policy from beginning of 2022. Rishi Sunak didn't particularly like it at the time when he was Chancellor. He sort of thought, well, I don't think there's much value for money in this. It doesn't seem to be very sensible. But in the summer leadership contest against Liz Truss, it became a purity test, and Sunak decided, well, I've got to say I like the Rwanda policy. So he has, for political reasons, got himself into a corner, and a critic would say that was bad politics. He would say I had no choice, and I've been bashed into this position by the Tory right, which is forever addicted to harder and harder lines that make things impossible for prime ministers. But it's difficult for him. But
so can political skill get Rishi Sunak out of this?
I don't know if a political skill can. It's more the sort of threat of do you really want to do this again? Do you really want to get rid of another Prime Minister? We got rid of Boris Johnson, we got rid of Theresa May, we got rid of David Cameron, we got rid of Liz Truss. Do you really want to get rid of me as well? Do you really think the voters will say, oh, great, another Prime Minister? And he probably got a point. That is, but to be honest, if his best argument is don't do it to me like you did to the others because the voters won't look kindly upon that, it's not a great argument. His argument should be, I'm the best person for the job, I've got the best policies to win the election and the best personality to win the election. And on those elements, he is struggling to win that argument, which is why you're getting these conversations going.
Yeah, absolutely staggering. Head in hands on the number of PMs that we've had in a row in the UK. But look, those meetings are happening in Westminster. We're thinking about this major bill, but then at the same time, with little fanfare and pre-briefing, the Prime Minister is also under a very different type of pressure, giving evidence to the COVID-19 inquiry. Let's just take a listen to a bit of what he had to say just this morning to that inquiry.
I just wanted to start by saying how deeply sorry I am to all of those who lost loved ones, family members through the pandemic, and also all those who suffered in the various different ways throughout the pandemic and as a result of the actions we're taking.
So a strikingly similar apology to what we heard from Boris Johnson, which had the King's Counsel Hugo Keith asking the former PM, what are you apologising for exactly? Alex, how does the COVID inquiry testimony then fit into this backdrop of upheaval within the Tory party? Does it actually help to distract the Prime Minister to give him something else to focus on, or is it something that's a risk?
I think it's a problem because really, in a situation as grave as Sunak's on the Rwanda Bill, he needs to be spending the day convincing his MPs to back him. And unfortunately for him, he has no choice but to spend an inquiry going through all this sort of recent history that certainly he would rather not go through at any time, let alone today. So it is a problem. It adds to this idea that he just has essentially crisis after crisis piling up and pressure after pressure building. I think Boris Johnson came through his hearing last week relatively unscathed, and Sunak will hope to do the same thing. We kind of know what happened in COVID. I think, and it's sort of quite hard to create a new news line that is going to cause a huge storm in Westminster. So that while his attention is on COVID, the attention of everybody else will be on Rwanda in Westminster.
But it is very revealing, though, to see those individuals having to answer questions in quite a different forum with a lawyer, quite slow, very deliberate, and that is quite an unusual venue to see the Prime Minister in. That's why it's been so revealing. Alex, you are also our resident WhatsApp expert when it comes to Westminster. I want you to have a listen to what Rishi Sunak was being asked in terms of his messages, his WhatsApp messages. Have a listen.
I've changed my phone multiple times over the past few years, and as that has happened, the messages have not come across. I'm not a prolific user of WhatsApp in the first instance, primarily communication with my private office, and obviously anything that was of significance through those conversations or exchanges will have been recorded officially by my civil servants, as one would expect.
So not a prolific WhatsApp user. That goes against the tech bro image that the Prime Minister has. What do you make of that?
It does. I mean, interestingly, I've spoken to cabinet ministers even about this last few months, and a common complaint is that they WhatsApp Rishi Sunak to say, "Hi, Prime Minister, would you like to meet to discuss something?" Or, "Hi, Prime Minister, I've had an idea about this policy." And on WhatsApp, when you can see that someone's read your
left
message
on red,
and you get those blue ticks, he leaves them on red. He reads the message, he leaves them on blue ticks, and he doesn't reply. So I think he's probably telling the truth when he says that he's not a big WhatsApper. To the real immense frustration of some of his colleagues, but certainly the fact that he's changed his phone a few times, I think it may well be for real reasons, for security purposes, whatever. But I think voters are going to say, why are all these senior politicians changing their phones all the time and losing all their WhatsApp messages? Very convenient.
What's really at stake for the Prime Minister in answering these questions?
Well, I think I think what the inquiry would like to find out is whether, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak were admitting mistakes, back then on WhatsApp, and whether they were having policy deliberations that were revealing beyond what we already know. I imagine so many WhatsApps have been published already through the evidence so far. Without seeing all of them, I think we get a pretty good idea of what happened and what the sort of culture and feeling was like in Number 10 at the time.
OK. Alex, thank you so much for being with us on the programme. That is Bloomberg senior government reporter Alex Wickham, then looking at Rishi Sunak and the dilemmas and difficulties he faces this week.
Yeah, certainly. So as we're watching for developments on how those groups within the Tory party decide to vote on the bill, the legal opinions as well, we're also waiting to hear from an unlikely figure who may be weighing on the minds of some Tory MPs, and that's Nigel Farage. The politician is landing back in the UK after his stint on the reality TV show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Our reporter Tiwa Adebayo is back with us in studio. Tiwa, you came to talk to us before Nigel Farage went into the jungle to begin with. Why do we care about him coming out now?
Well, it does feel like just yesterday that I was sitting here discussing what might happen when Mr. Farage was let loose in the jungle. But I think now is the time where we'll really start to see the impact of his reality TV stint. Nigel Farage, of course, has been a thorn in the side of the Conservative Party for over a decade now. Many have learnt the mistakes of underestimating him. So I think we should always care what Mr. Farage is doing, especially because his fingerprints seem to be all over the government's immigration policy. And so understanding his thinking is really key to understanding the government's next moves. We've been talking about Rishi Sunak's 5 key pledges. Of course, a big one is stopping small boats. Now, Nigel Farage is also known for his campaigning on immigration and his videos about talking about stopping small boats coming into southern England. So we can see that the Prime Minister and the government are clearly trying to regain some of the ground taken by the former UKIP leader and also now Reform UK. And so it'll be very interesting to see where he goes next, where his political ambitions, which are always alive, will take him.
I mean, look, in this strange media landscape, perhaps I shouldn't be surprised that I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here is somehow a de rigueur now for politicians and is hugely politically influential. I can't say I'm a regular watcher, but what might happen as he emerges from this? What could be his next move? Is it savvy? I mean, I mentioned on a previous political podcast that, people that I meet who are not involved in media are very interested in I'm a Celebrity. I mean, does this help him perhaps shaping the narrative around he's never managed to become an MP? That's the bottom line. But maybe would it change that fact?
Well, I mean, the jury is out on that one. It's certainly true that there have been lower viewing figures than last year's I'm a Celebrity, in which Matt Hancock took place. He also finished in 3rd place, just like Nigel Farage, so maybe that's where
it's the politician's place, obviously.
Absolutely. But as to whether or not it'll help him cut through the noise and reach a different sort of audience, it's certainly something he wanted going into the programme. He actually talked whilst he was in the jungle about wanting to do more challenges to reach more of a different audience, a younger audience. So it's something that was on his mind. There was a great piece out by Bloomberg's political team this morning, and they said that it would be sort of naive to suggest that Nigel Farage would leave the jungle without a sort of plan to leverage the support that we saw for the party Reform UK that he's a part of but does not lead. He'll definitely now, having left the jungle over the weekend, he'll probably be sitting down in a hotel in Australia thinking about his next move, thinking about how he can really capitalise on the attention that we're seeing for his party and also his politics.
Yeah, and as we know, always an interesting political figure to watch, as you say, for the reasons you've outlined about his influence on the Tory party as well. Tiwa Adebayo, thanks very much for talking us through Nigel Farage's stint in the jungle.
Next, to another item then on the government's agenda, a major new reservoir in Oxfordshire that's supposed to help ensure London's water supply in the future is up in the air. The project needs government approval. Already one local MP has called it a monstrosity. This as MPs will question executives from Thames Water tomorrow over the state of the company's finances. This is a story that we've been covering for some time at Bloomberg. Our reporter Eamon Farhat joins us now for more on this. Look, we'll get on to the issues around Thames Water, which seem to only be growing more severe in a moment. But firstly, just on this reservoir project in particular, is it going to get approval? Why is it so important?
So yeah, in the UK, there hasn't been a new reservoir for something like 30 years, and there definitely is a need for reservoirs. When I talk to people across the industry, we have these projections that show that, we're using more water, there's more droughts happening across the country, so we need this reservoir. But it is going to cost apparently £2.4 billion. It's going to be about 3.5 times the size of Monaco, 7 square kilometers. So it's actually a huge thing. And that's a lot where the local opposition comes from. It's actually like kind of a pretty big mega project. And the thing about this is that we're talking about it now. The construction wouldn't start until 2026. It wouldn't actually be operational until probably 2040 or 2039. So it's really, we're planning way, way ahead. So it's sometimes difficult to, I guess, with these bigger projects, think about a decision now when it's going to happen in maybe 15 years. But yeah, lots of local opposition. And actually the co-CEO, the interim co-CEO of Thames Water, Catherine Ross, and I met her actually just before all of this happened back in June. She lives quite near to the reservoir, and even she was saying people around her local area, they aren't the biggest fan of her because they know that this big company, Thames Water, is planning this massive reservoir which could cause flood risks, will be a massive cost, and also could cause issues in the local area.
Yeah, so another challenge then for Thames Water as we consider the difficulty, Eamon, around their finances to the debts, the company soaring to almost £15 billion. Just give us a reminder of what sort of financial state the company's in.
Yeah, as you said, Thames Water definitely across the industry is probably one of the, on the worst side of things. They have this massive debt. There's also this new investment plan that they have to try and fund. So basically from 2025 to 2030, they propose this £18.7 billion investment plan to the regulator, which has to get approved. But that investment plan, they will need about 2.5 billion of investment into their company. And right now, things aren't looking good from the people we're talking to. Just to give you an idea, back in June, the CEO, Sarah Bentley, she abruptly resigned. There was lots of talk about nationalisation because of all this debt. And Thames Water, in all of its communication to us, to Parliament as well, in a hearing back then, they referred to this £500 million of equity and that there was more equity coming. But it kind of became clear in the last maybe week that this 500 million of equity, it actually may have actually been a loan. Thames Water has a very complex corporate structure, and it seems that this 500 million equity was kind of presented as an equity to Thames Water, but actually came in as a loan through one of the parent companies. And that might be one of the major focuses of this hearing, because they did tell Parliament back in, I think it was in July, that this was new equity. It's kind of a vote of confidence in Thames Water. But now, if this turns out to be a loan with 8% annual interest, it's a very different picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've got this emergency parliamentary hearing. You've got to think that the company executives tomorrow are going to be going to get a very severe grilling from MPs. There are sort of question marks about whether Thames Water, as you say, is in that sort of downward spiral. How much blame, can be laid at the door of the executives, the very complex structure of it, versus the regulator. It's a real mess. What are MPs going to be asking?
Yeah, last time we had this, they were definitely going in very, very hard. I think what's quite interesting about this is that Catherine Ross, who is the co-CEO of Thames Water, the interim co-CEO, she also used to be the chief executive of Ofwat. So they actually last time were asking her almost putting her Ofwat hat on and putting her Thames Water hat on, blaming her for issues of the past, present, and I guess the future. Yeah, there's always that kind of balance between is it the regulator's fault or Thames Water's fault? When Thames Water presented these investment plans, this major, £18.7 billion investment plan, they made it clear in those plans that in the current rules that the regulator presents to them, the returns just aren't there for their plan to be viable. So they're almost trying to force the regulator's hand by saying, we need to be able to offer greater returns to investors if we want to invest in our water system. So I think, that's going to be a major question is, who is to blame? And then there's also all these questions about what happened in the past. Macquarie was they owned some funds which managed Thames Water from 2007 to 2017. The debt rose from 3.4 billion to 10.8 billion in that period. And that is kind of still hanging over Thames Water all these years later. And there's often a question of, was there not enough regulation early on? But I guess, in hindsight, we can say all that. It's difficult to say to act on that now.
Yeah, certainly lots of difficult questions to be answered by Thames Water and their executives. Of course, MPs very conscious of the fact that Thames Water bills are due to go up significantly as well. Yes. And that's something that their electorate is going to be watching for very closely for details of who exactly is going to pay for this. Eamon, Farhat, thanks so much for joining us with the details of that story as we continue to watch the latest developments with Thames Water as well. This is something that politicians are going to get questions on the doorsteps in the election campaign that we're expecting.
It's an absolutely staggering story, given that Thames Water is the largest water company in the UK. You know, we've already had the issue with sewage into Britain's waterways. This is another major infrastructure story that seems to be sort of crumbling in a lot of ways, and there are lots of questions to be answered, as well as thinking about the future.
And the question of public investment, will that be needed to help bail these companies out? Because, you know, other water companies have had financial difficulties as well. Thames Water, absolutely the most acute of those two, but it is a challenge facing the industry as a whole, which is, at the end of the day, a public utility that we all need. But that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
So this episode was produced by James Wilcock. Our audio engineer was Marufal Hussain. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.